Her weathered hands moved gently across the boy's face, fingers tracing the outline of his closed eyelids, with a tenderness that came from decades of caring for children not her own. Grandmother Eshe, 68 years old and dressed in traditional red robes that marked her heritage from the Ethiopian highlands, whispered words in Amharic that young Kareem could not understand, but somehow felt in his bones. Behind them, on the pristine lawn of the Al-Hassan estate, Sheikh Omar stood with both hands pressed to his head in desperation, watching this scene that his rational mind told him was pointless, but his broken heart prayed might somehow be different. His son had been blind for 6 months, declared permanently so by the best ophthalmologists money could buy, and now their elderly maid was performing what looked like some kind of folk ritual, and Omar did not know whether to stop her or fall to his knees and beg whatever gods might be listening to make this impossible thing happen. Kareem was 9 years old and had been able to see perfectly until the day he could not. It had started with headaches, terrible crushing pain that made him scream and vomit, that sent his parents rushing him to the hospital in the middle of the night. The scans had shown a tumor pressing against his optic nerves, a mass that required immediate surgery to prevent it from spreading into his brain. The operation had been successful in removing the cancer, but the damage to the optic nerves had been catastrophic, the pressure having been too severe for too long. When Kareem woke from surgery, he woke to darkness, permanent and complete, and no amount of money or expertise or prayer seemed capable of changing that fact. Sheikh Omar had taken his son to specialists in 17 countries over the following months, chasing every possibility, every experimental treatment, every doctor who claimed to have new techniques for optic nerve regeneration. They had tried stem cell injections in Switzerland, genetic therapy in California, radical surgical procedures in Japan. Nothing worked. The consensus among every expert was clear and unchanging. The damage was too extensive, the nerves too degraded, sight was lost forever. Kareem would need to learn Braille, would need mobility training, would need to build a completely different life than the one he had been living. The blindness had changed more than just Kareem's ability to navigate the physical world. It had stolen his joy, his confidence, his sense of safety in a universe that had suddenly become hostile and unknowable. He barely spoke anymore, spent most of his time in his room listening to audiobooks, flinching at unexpected sounds, refusing to go outside where he might trip or expose his vulnerability. His parents, who had always been able to fix problems with money and connections, found themselves helpless in the face of his withdrawal, unable to reach him across the chasm that darkness had created. Grandmother Eshe had been working for the Al-Hassan family for 30 years, since before Omar himself was born. She had been hired by Omar's mother as a young woman, brought from Ethiopia to help with housework and childcare, and had stayed on through the decades, becoming less an employee and more a fixture of the household. When Omar's mother had died 5 years ago, Eshe had mourned as deeply as any blood relative, and she had transferred all her fierce protective love to Omar's own children, especially Kareem, who reminded her of her own son, lost to illness decades ago in Africa. Eshe had watched Kareem's decline into depression with a grandmother's heartbreak, had seen the light in his spirit go dark along with his vision, and she had decided that medical science might have given up, but she had not. She came from a tradition that Western doctors dismissed as superstition, a lineage of healers who understood that the body was not merely mechanical, that faith and intention and ancient knowledge sometimes accomplished what technology could not. Her own grandmother had been able to cure ailments that baffled village doctors, using herbs and prayers and techniques passed down through generations. For weeks she had prepared, gathering specific herbs from an Ethiopian market 3 hours away, preparing oils infused with plants that grew only in certain highland regions, praying in the old ways that her grandmother had taught her. She had not told the family what she was planning, because she knew they would forbid it, would think she was taking advantage of their desperation. So, she had waited until this morning, when Omar's wife Layla was out shopping and Omar himself was distracted with phone calls, to approach Kareem in the garden and ask if she could try something that might help. Kareem, who trusted grandmother Eshe more than almost anyone, had agreed without hesitation. He had endured enough medical procedures to last a lifetime, enough doctors poking and prodding and disappointing him. If grandmother Eshe, who had never lied to him, who had held him when he cried about his blindness, who had stayed by his bedside reading to him for hours. If she thought she could help, then he would let her try. What did he have to lose that had not already been taken? So now they stood on the lawn, Eshe's fingers moving in patterns across his face that felt both random and purposeful, her voice low and rhythmic in a language he did not speak, while she applied oil to his temples and eyelids that smelled of unfamiliar flowers and earth. Omar had discovered them minutes ago and had nearly intervened, had actually started walking toward them to demand an explanation, but something in the scene had stopped him. And now he watched, trapped between skepticism and desperate hope as this ritual unfolded. Eshe's prayers grew more intense, her hands moving faster, pressing gently against specific points around Kareem's eyes and forehead, points that corresponded to energy meridians she had been taught about as a girl, pathways of life force that Western medicine did not acknowledge, but that her tradition considered fundamental to healing. She believed that sometimes the body forgot how to heal itself, that trauma locked away natural regenerative capabilities, and that the right combination of plant medicine and focused intention could remind the body of what it had forgotten. "Open your eyes, child," she said finally in Arabic, her voice gentle but commanding. Kareem hesitated, afraid of the darkness he would see, the darkness he always saw now when he opened his eyes. But he trusted her, so he opened them, and for a moment there was nothing different, just the familiar absence of sight. And then, something flickered, a sensation of light where there should be none, a hint of shape and shadow that made him gasp. "I see something," he whispered, afraid to believe it. "There is light. I can see light." Omar's hands dropped from his head, his body going rigid with disbelief. This was impossible, medically impossible. The optic nerves were damaged beyond repair. Every scan had confirmed it. Every expert had agreed. But Kareem was blinking now, his hands coming up to his face, his voice rising with excitement and confusion. "There are colors, shapes. Everything is blurry, but I can see, Baba, I can see." And then he was turning toward where his father stood, and their eyes met, actually met, Kareem's gaze focusing on Omar's face for the first time in 6 months, and Omar felt his knees give out, collapsing onto the grass, as sobs tore from his chest. The hours that followed were a chaos of joy and medical intervention and complete bafflement. Layla returned home to find her son describing colors he could see, ran to him crying so hard she could barely breathe. Omar called every ophthalmologist who had treated Kareem, demanding they come immediately to examine his son, to explain what had happened. Within 3 hours, 5 different doctors were running tests, shining lights in Kareem's eyes, performing scans, comparing results to previous imaging, and finding absolutely nothing in their medical framework that explained what they were observing. The lead ophthalmologist, a German specialist named Dr. Mueller, who had operated on Kareem originally, examined the scans multiple times, ran the tests again, and finally had to admit that what he was seeing was medically inexplicable. "The damage from 6 months ago is still largely present," he said slowly. "There is some new growth of nerve tissue, but it should not be sufficient for vision like he is describing. I cannot explain this, it should not be possible." Omar turned to Eshe, who had been standing quietly in the corner, watching the expensive equipment and the confused experts with patient wisdom. "What did you do?" he asked, and there was no accusation in his voice, only wonder and gratitude. Eshe shrugged slightly, her lined face calm. "I used the medicine of my grandmothers," she said simply. "Plants that grow near my village, prayers my grandmother taught me, knowledge that is older than hospitals and machines. I do not understand how your doctors explain things with their nerves and their scans. I only know that sometimes the body can heal if you ask it properly, if you remind it what it is capable of." I believed Kareem's sight was not gone, only sleeping, waiting to be awakened. The doctors exchanged skeptical glances. Dr. Mueller started to say something about coincidence and spontaneous regeneration, but Omar cut him off. "My son was blind," he said firmly. 17 of the best doctors in the world told me he would never see again. And now he can see. I do not care if you can explain it or not. It happened, and it happened because of her." He turned to Eshe with profound respect. "Thank you. You have given me back my son. How can I possibly repay you?" Eshe smiled, the kind of smile that contained both wisdom and sadness. "You cannot repay a gift, Sheikh Omar," she said. But you can honor it by honoring where it comes from. My people, the knowledge of my ancestors. We are so often dismissed as primitive, as ignorant, as having nothing to offer your modern world. Perhaps this can remind you that wisdom takes many forms, that healing comes from many sources, that the grandmother in red robes might know something the man with the expensive degree does not. Over the following weeks, Kareem's vision continued to improve, stabilizing at about 70% of normal function, enough to read and play and live an essentially normal life. The medical establishment was forced to document his case as a spontaneous, unexplained recovery, appearing in journals with tentative theories about placebo effects and unreported factors. But no one could definitively explain what had happened, eventually filing it under medical mysteries that occasionally defied understanding. Sheikh Omar underwent his own transformation. The experience had cracked open something in his worldview, had made him question assumptions about knowledge and value, and whose wisdom deserved respect. He started researching traditional African medicine, funding studies that combined indigenous knowledge with modern scientific methods. He established a foundation that supported traditional healers in Ethiopia and other African countries, giving them resources while documenting their techniques, building bridges between ancient practice and contemporary medicine. He also insisted that Eshe be treated no longer as a maid, but as an honored member of the household, a grandmother in truth as well as title. He tripled her salary, built her a cottage on the estate grounds, and most importantly, he listened to her, really listened, asking about her life and her knowledge and her traditions with genuine curiosity and respect. Kareem developed a fascination with healing that would shape his entire future. He wanted to understand what had happened to him, how grandmother Eshe's medicine had worked, whether science and traditional knowledge could be combined. As he grew older, he studied both modern medicine and ethnobotany, learning about the chemical compounds in the plants Eshe had used, discovering that many contained neuroprotective properties that were only beginning to be understood by Western pharmacology. By the time Kareem was 25, he had completed a medical degree and a PhD in ethnopharmacology, his dissertation focusing on traditional Ethiopian medicinal plants. He had founded a research institute that brought together indigenous healers and trained scientists, creating protocols that respected both knowledge systems while rigorously testing efficacy and safety. Grandmother Eshe lived to see Kareem's success, her final years spent as an honored consultant at his institute, teaching young researchers about plant identification and preparation methods. She died at 82, surrounded by family both biological and chosen, her legacy secured not just in the boy whose sight she had restored, but in the fundamental shift she had helped create in how different forms of healing knowledge could coexist and strengthen each other. At her funeral, Kareem spoke about the day on the lawn, when she had touched his face and whispered prayers in Amharic, how she had given him not just vision, but a life's purpose, a bridge between worlds that his unique perspective allowed him to walk. He described how Western medicine had given up on him, how it was traditional knowledge dismissed as superstition that had saved him, and how the future of healing required honoring both, learning from both, refusing the false choice between ancient wisdom and modern science. Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to thank you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to show your support by liking and subscribing so this channel can reach more people like you. Now back to the story. The story spread far beyond the Al-Hassan family, becoming the subject of medical papers and documentary films. It sparked conversations about integrating traditional medicine into healthcare systems, about respecting diverse approaches to healing, about the limits of any single medical paradigm. For Omar, the experience remained the most transformative of his life, the moment when his son's darkness became light again, when an elderly woman in red robes proved wiser than 17 doctors, when everything he thought he knew about the world revealed itself as partial and incomplete. And every time he looked at his son, seeing Kareem's eyes bright and focused and full of purpose, he remembered that day on the lawn when impossibility became reality, when faith and ancient knowledge accomplished what technology could not, when a grandmother's weathered hands moved gently across a boy's face and whispered words that somehow, inexplicably, miraculously, brought back the light.